And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this Friday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The newest entry in our continuing series of the best movie you've never seen. Now, this is one that some Gen Xers, very few elder millennials, some boomers will have seen. It is a movie with an extraordinary cast that got a big build-up, despite the fact it didn't have an enormous budget. The reviews were okay. It's barely fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. At 60% or above indicates fresh. 59% and you're rotten. Just neither here nor there. But the film got decent reviews, but it didn't make that much of an impression at the box office. Titanic was still in theaters. This movie is now 26 and a half, nearly 27 years old. It's a better movie than people probably remember from the time, but it is an important movie historically because it is the last lead performance from one of the acknowledged GOATs, one of the not only greatest film actors, greatest movie stars, but one of the best human beings to ever work in the movie business. The movie is Robert Benton's Twilight, released on March 6th, 1998. The legendary star is Paul Newman. Now, I actually saw Twilight on its opening night in theaters. The reviews were good enough where I was always going to see it anyway. You knew it wasn't going to be terrible. Robert Benton had worked with Newman in Nobody's Fool from 1994. I don't really understand this, but going back 30 years, there were a lot of people that were frustrated that Tom Hanks appeared to be on his way to winning back-to-back Oscars for Forrest Gump. And there was a hope that maybe Paul Newman in Nobody's Fool could somehow get the award. Travolta wasn't going to win Best Actor for Pulp Fiction, and Morgan wasn't going to win for Shawshank. But this is one of those situations where I feel like Hanks' performance plays better now even than it did then. And he ended up winning another Best Actor award. But if we're being honest, I don't think that Paul Newman does anything that spectacular in Nobody's Fool. The movie's okay. If anything, Bruce Willis sort of steals the scenes that he's in with Paul. So I really never understood why there were certain people I didn't want Hanks to win back-to-back Oscars. Fine. But, I mean, his performance in Forrest Gump, which I thought was just okay. I like the movie, but his performance seems a lot better now to me than it did all those years ago. Again, for whatever that's worth. But Twilight, I enjoyed it in theaters. It didn't like blow me away or knock me out. It's a story. It seems to be building to more than what actually is there. And that kind of frustrated me because I felt like the pieces were in place for like a 4-star mystery thriller. And it's a mystery. It's not a thriller, certainly not an action movie. But it is an interesting rumination on aging and how there are certain people that are always going to be followers and there are certain people that are going to be leaders. And there are those who are always going to clean up the messes of people that maybe they consider to be better than them or entitled to such treatment. It's an angle that the 1993 film, the Merchant Ivory production with Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson, Hugh Grant, Christopher Reeve, Remains of the Day gets into the idea that you do a certain thing, you take certain actions because you believe that not only is your employer paying you, but that your employer is a superior person to you. And in the world of the movie Twilight, it's got so many incredible performers, but the roles that could do more with the particular roles. So Reese Witherspoon, who was rising fast, plays the daughter of a showbiz couple where the guy, played by Gene Hackman, is retired and he's slowly dying. And the mom is played by Susan Sarandon. And I think that she's semi-retired. But so Reese plays their daughter. This is a showbiz family. They're crazy loaded. And Paul Newman, who has been in love with Susan Sarandon's character for presumably decades, he has worked with them and for them. He's kind of somebody whose job it is to make sure they don't get into too much trouble if they get into any trouble at all. And so you have the big hitter of Hackman, Susan Sarandon had recently won an Oscar. Well, Jean had recently won an Oscar for Unforgiven, and Sarandon had won the Best Actress for Tim Robbins' Dead Man Walking. And then you had Reese, who was she was really rising fast. And then you also have in the cast Liev Schreiber, Stockard Channing, and James Garner. And Garner plays a similar kind of character to Newman, where he's sort of a bit of a private eye, but I feel like he is somebody who's going to do other people's dirty work. And there's a running gag in this film where Paul Newman's character at the very beginning of the movie is dispatched to Mexico because the Reese Witherspoon character, the wayward, hypersexualized daughter, stop me if you've heard this before, she seems to have gotten into trouble. So he's dispatched, just bring her back. We'll give you whatever amount of money it's going to be. They can afford it. And it somehow manages to get shot, and he gets shot in the leg. And it's not a bad wound. He's fine. He limps around. But the story, it's like the old game we used to play, Telephone, where he basically got shot in the nuts. He didn't get shot in the nuts, but everybody thinks he did. And if the legend becomes fact, print a legend. Everybody just assumes he got shot in the nuts. You reach a point, fuck you. Okay, I got shot in the nuts. And because Paul Newman's such a kind of classy guy, usually playing classy characters, for him to even have to deal with such puerile crap, it's almost beneath him, but somehow he makes it work. Now, I mentioned about the movie being a rumination on age. Now, in the world of the story, it is the concept of kind of having high hopes, having dreams, and those dreams not really being actualized. There's that. And there are some pretty interesting conversations because we don't exactly know, because James Garner's character and Newman's character, it seems like they're friends, but then there's a turn where we start to say, I don't know that they're actually friends. I think maybe they've been friendly acquaintances, but this looks like the movie might be headed to some kind of a standoff between these two old guys. Well, what's going to happen here? And from the broader historical perspective, as a film historian, this is Paul Newman's last lead. And because of that, the movie is important, even if the machinations of plot are really not that exciting. There's moments with Liev Schreiber where he has run afoul of Paul Newman's character, Harry, and there's a few laughs because Schreiber's character is presented as a bit of a clown. He's got a clown with a bad temper. And there's a lot of stuff, buried secrets from the past in all of this. But when I think of, for example, Clint Eastwood, The Mule is going to be, Cry Macho is probably going to be the last film where he is in the movie. Clint was a lot older when he did The Mule. He was I think he was 89 when he shot The Mule. He may have already been 90 now that I'm thinking about it. Paul Newman, for somebody who took impeccable care of himself, I don't know. He didn't age as well as maybe he just didn't have the great genetics, because when I tell you he had a regimen for taking care of himself, he was a fitness nut. And Paul Newman at age 70 in the Hudsucker Proxy, 69 going on 70, Paul Newman still had abs. He still had abs. And we're not talking like Sylvester Stallone. He never looked like that. But Newman was a fitness nut. He was a health conscious individual. In this movie, he was 72 during filming. I feel like he looks older, and I don't think it was makeup. I think he didn't age as well as he probably should have. Maybe it was all the time on the ski slopes or the race car driving age. I have no idea. But you think of, for example, Harrison Ford, and we've seen the previews for the movie where he's going to be Red Hulk, the Captain America film. Harrison's was 9 years older, 8 or 9 years older than Newman in this film. He looks younger. And I don't even understand how that works, but Paul looks like a guy coming to the end of the line. So the fact that he was older, it kind of works for the character. And Susan, I think, was supposed to be slightly older than she really was at the time. But you think of some of the all-timers, their last lead role, and what did they make of it? Newman's performance in this film is really good. I feel like he does more with this character, and the character has more shadings than his Oscar-nominated turn in Nobody's Fool. And really, when you think of, well, what was the last truly great performance that Newman gave? A lot of people would point to a film in '89 called Blaze, which was about the Louisiana governor, Earl Long, and the relationship he had with the kind of iconic, infamous stripper, Blaze Starr. That movie's okay. It's okay. You remember Lolita Davidovich, who was just absolute fire in the film. And he gave an interesting performance in Roland Joffe's Fat Man and Little Boy. That's kind of like Oppenheimer before Oppenheimer. He plays Leslie Groves in Fat Man and Little Boy. That's the character that Matt Damon played in Christopher Nolan's film. Not entirely successful. And you go back a little further, he won his only, and it's pathetic, but he won his only acting Oscar for The Color of Money in '86, so a dozen years before Twilight. And in that movie, he's pretty much acted off the screen by Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise should have gotten a supporting actor nomination. Where was his nomination? It was Newman's time. You know, we always talk about the Oscars are political. When Newman won that Oscar, everybody said, this is ridiculous. This is the last time he's probably going to play this kind of juicy role. We got to give it to him. Whoever the we is, because you're dealing with presumably a couple of thousand people voting, but somehow there is still a we. There is some sort of a collective. I don't know. Is it like the Borg? Your guess is as good as mine. The mechanics, this is another one of those stories where I went in wanting a different movie than what I got. And as much as I enjoyed it, like I said, 3 stars in theaters, I watched it again a couple of years ago, and the film played better because I didn't have outsized expectations. So if you watch the trailer for this, and there's a lot of jokes on the internet, because when people talk about Paul Newman is in a movie Twilight, you immediately think of the Twilight, Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart. No, it's not that. There's nothing. There's no vampires in this movie. There are people in the film who are leeches, and there are people in the film who take and take and take and take. And this is one of the conversations that James Garner has with Paul Newman. Newman is still okay with his situation, kind of working as he's a jack of all trades. You want some private eye shit. You want something from the past buried that no one's ever going to find it. You want somebody who's going to find their daughter in Mexico. But Newman's character of Harry is okay doing what he's doing because he's desperately in love with Susan Sarandon's character. And it almost feels like the last decades of his life, it's been him moving towards maybe, just maybe, getting the clothes off. OMG. He might get to actually have sex with this woman who's a lot younger than him, but that he has worshipped for 20 years, 25, I don't even know how long it's supposed to be. But James Garner, I've always felt a bit underrated, even though he did win a Best Supporting Actor Oscar, but I feel like even that was just that they threw it his way. Because, again, his performance in Murphy's Romance, that's where he won his Oscar. It's okay. That movie is not as good as its reputation, in my opinion. Sally Field's all right. The late Corey Haim, I think he's the best thing about that movie. He's terrific in that, as the Sally Field's son. But James Garner in this film, it is very much a supporting performance. But he has a moment of incredible focus and concentration with Newman where he's leveling with him. Neither of these guys wants to be antagonistic. And again, the age aspect. They're too old for this shit. Danny Glover in the original Lethal Weapon was like 40 or 41 in real life. And he's playing a guy who's 50 who keeps saying, I'm too old for this shit. Garner was, I think, he may have been slightly younger than Newman in real life. But they're too old to be doing this. They're too old to be cleaning up for the messes of multimillionaires. Get somebody else to fucking do it. This is a young man's game. But Garner has this incredible moment where he's not sure how it's going to turn out with him and Harry. And Paul, as Harry, he doesn't know how this is going to go. Where these characters are going to end up. Are they going to continue this kind of weird friendship, or are they going to become enemies? James Garner asks a legitimate question. Don't you get tired of cleaning up behind the beautiful people? You might pay, but the implication is you're better than this. I'm better than this, and you're better than this. Don't you just get tired of being somebody's boy, somebody's lackey, somebody just throws some money at you? They say jump, you say how high. Aren't you getting tired of this? It's some of Garner's best film acting. And I really like what he does a few years later with Clint in Space Cowboys, another kind of, it's not so much that it's underrated, but I feel like the movie is better, even though it was a box office hit, got good reviews. I feel like it's better than its reputation. And Garner doesn't have that much to do in Space Cowboys, but similar to Donald Sutherland, the late, great Donald Sutherland, who pretty much runs away with that film. But when Garner gets to actually do something, he's great. He was just one of those, he had such a way with a line reading. And when he was very, very young, you look at him in the 50s and 60s, he was exceedingly good looking guy, matinee idol looking guy. And another movie that you're all familiar with, where Garner, the idea of age and the concept of getting older or growing older, either gracefully or sometimes not so gracefully, 6 years later, he's in The Notebook as the, spoiler alert, the older version of Ryan Gosling's character. And if you want to go from, again, a broader perspective, you can compare Rachel McAdams and Ryan Gosling, but the real people, Jenna Rollins, who plays the Rachel McAdams character, older, and James Garner, you look at them as they appeared in the movie as much, much older. But then you look at them young. You see them young, and it's difficult not to kind of get emotional. It's difficult to not get emotional. And one thing that the movie Nobody's Fool, there's one moment in that film that I feel is touched by genius. And it's a moment where Paul Newman, towards the end of the movie, and he's playing younger. I think his character is supposed to be 60. Newman could not pass for 60 by that point. He looked his age. So there's a moment in Nobody's Fool where Paul Newman thinks he's going to abscond with his friend's wife, that they're just going to run off together. And there's a framing of a shot where you see, and you're almost reminded of just how blue Paul Newman's eyes are. His eyes were freakishly blue. I mean, Henry Fonda had very blue eyes too, but Newman's eyes were a color that almost was impossible and didn't make sense. And in this one moment in Nobody's Fool, when you see it, you suddenly remember this guy once used to be really young, and he was an incredibly attractive man, and he was fit and athletic, and now he's playing this kind of broken down old war horse, picking up someone else's mess, and it's sad. It's almost embarrassing. But you, unfortunately, and there's a lot of card playing between Gene Hackman and Paul Newman, and I don't think it's an accident. Paul's character here, he's playing the cards that he's dealt as best as he can. And maybe it's pie in the sky. Maybe it's a pipe dream, a fantasy that can't ever happen. Him hooking up with Susan Sarandon's character, who he's just so desperate for. But maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. Because Hackman's character of Jack Ames is not doing so good. He's not doing so good. And there's even a kind of a humorous moment where Paul is so overtly lusting after Susan. And Susan really looks terrific in this film. And I know she says a lot of stupid stuff. And I'm not talking about Susan Sarandon, the personality, but just as an actress and a screen presence. In this movie, she is lit perfectly. She is she's framed like a movie star. She's playing a movie star. Like this is, again, nail meat head. But there is a moment in the movie where, and this is some of Newman's best acting in the film, he's all but drooling over her. And she knows it, and she's soaking it up because husband isn't doing well. Like the acting is solid. They're not just trading on their names and, okay, she's just won an Oscar, and here's Paul, he won an Oscar, and Gene won an Oscar, and Garner won an Oscar. Everybody in the cast except Reese of the main cast, they all had their Oscars. But she's in a bathing suit or whatever, and she looks fantastic. We're not going to make believe that she doesn't look great. She looks great, and he is just, the look on Newman's face is just gold. Because it's like, we're supposed to be able to read his mind. He wants to pull a bathing suit off. And Gene, whose character is sick, I guess he's looking out the window and watching, he's lighting a cigarette, and she's just doing all kinds of stuff with her eyes and body language. She's totally fucking with him. And Gene goes, Harry, my wife's never going to sleep with you. You might as well come up here and play cards. You might as well come up here and play cards. You might as well just keep trying to play the cards that you're being dealt in life. Well, the story doesn't really go the way that we expect it to. And it's a meditation on the kind of movie they used to make in the 40s and 50s, because story-wise, you could point to any number of kind of Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler type, Maltese Falcon, that type of story where there seem to be so many buried secrets and there's going to be exciting reveals. The movie isn't about exciting reveals. It's about character, and it's about sometimes just getting lucky and surviving the events of the story, not because you have plot armor or because you're Paul Newman, but because it's set up in such a way that in certain circumstances, you're just going to know what to do. And maybe your adversary doesn't know what to do. I feel like the movie does not take any advantage of Gene Hackman, and kind of wonder why Gene took the role. Now, Gene's previous film, it's a big, juicy, asshole, dastardly villain role in Absolute Power, speaking of Clint, which I think is a really good movie. It was a film that was a box office hit, an adaptation of just an insane runaway bestseller from David Baldacci. And I should point out, my dad loved the book. And even though the movie is entirely different, it's about 50% different. Spoiler alert, the main character in the movie, played by Clint, he's dead halfway through the book. And I remember Dad telling me when he saw that Clint was making a movie, he says, well, they're going to have to figure something out because they ain't making what we saw in the book. Well, what does that mean? Well, the character Clint's playing, he's not going to die halfway through the movie. No chance. Dad was getting all animated when he told me this. But Gene in Absolute Power plays President of the United States. And it is a really good villain role. And Gene had that kind of face where he could be a sympathetic villain, he could be a nefarious villain, he could be a good guy, he could be somewhere in between. I mean, Hackman was just about as good as anybody who did it. What an incredible, he and Clint are the same age. He's a couple of months older than Clint. And Gene's been retired now for 20 years. They always try to get him back. The same with Connery. Connery was in his early 70s when he walked away. He just didn't want to come back. You know what? People think, well, why don't you want to work? You don't need the money, right? You don't want to sit in a fucking trailer for 12 hours a day. It's not as much fun as you think. It took Charles Grodin in his autobiography to point out, do you have any idea how much sitting around doing nothing is the life of an actor at that level? Yeah, it's great making a ton of money, but you're sitting in a trailer all day. Sometimes you don't even get summoned. Yeah, I guess we'll just go back to the hotel. Maybe we'll have a few drinks. That's basically what it is. Gene doesn't have enough to do in this film. And to me, that is a weakness. When you get someone of that caliber, you got to give him more to do than just be sick. I'm sorry. And I feel like that's the biggest weakness of the movie. Why, despite the fact that the mystery isn't really that mysterious or exciting and there's no great reveal, plenty of movies, you don't have to actually show what everybody's going for. Marcellus Wallace briefcase in Pulp Fiction. Do we really give a shit that we don't actually find out what is in there? What's that's glowing? Is it a nuclear device? Now, it was a Tarantino in that situation. I think he was paying homage to a movie called Kiss Me Deadly, the Robert Aldrich film with Ralph Meeker in the 50s as Mike Hammer. That's Mickey Spillane. I mentioned Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, but Kiss Me Deadly was based on a novel by Mickey Spillane, who was in that ballpark, but he wasn't as nearly as talented as Hammett or Chandler. But Twilight is one of those movies that if people, for example, and this does come up, I've met a lot of young people over the years, half my age or even less. They know who certain names are, but they might be able to identify. It's kind of ridiculous. People know Paul Newman from the food, from the brand that you see in stores. They just think that he's a food guy. Oh, he was an actor. It's like George Foreman. What do you mean he was a boxer? What do you mean by what he was? He was a boxer. Do you ever notice how in some of those infomercials he's wearing boxing gloves? Yeah, I didn't think anything of it. You didn't think anything of it. Okay, that's fair. But if somebody says, I know who Paul Newman is, I understand he was a huge star and he was friends with Cruise, but I don't know that I've ever actually seen a movie with him. Give me a primer. Give me 3 films. This is one of the movies that I'm going to recommend for a young person because Reese Witherspoon is in the movie and she is easily identifiable. You say, oh my God, look how young she is here. This is not a great movie, but it is a really solid performance from Newman and the entire cast. Everybody brings their A game. And for a final true lead in a major Hollywood production, Paul's got nothing to be ashamed of because he's better than the material. He makes his character seem more interesting than he probably is by sheer force of will and the little glint, the sparkle that was still in his eye. The ability to hold a camera and engage the other actors and the ability to be funny. His character has a lot of laugh out loud moments because he is presented as this kind of old crotchety, even though he's really not that old and he shouldn't be that crotchety. But that's how the character is presented. Now, I don't think that this Twilight, is free on streaming anywhere. Maybe you could find it on Pluto or Tubi, but it's not free. It was actually on Netflix. I want to say in 2022, it had a run of a couple of months. And it was another one of those movies where, a new generation of fans didn't know Reese Witherspoon was in obscure 90s. They always do that. They tease it. Forgotten 90s classic with a young Reese Witherspoon hits Netflix or is tearing up the charts. But this is a movie that I am confident if you go in with the right level of expectations, you're going to see a good mystery with an absolutely incredible home run cast. If those are your expectations, you will not be disappointed. This is a really solid mystery, not a product of its time. It is a movie that plays better now, and I feel like is more effective now than when it was released. Twilight, released March 6, 1998. The most recent entry, I lost track of the number. That's why I could just make up a number, the 28th, but I don't actually know offhand which number of the best movie you've never seen this is. But Twilight, directed by Robert Benton and starring Paul Newman, Reese Witherspoon, Gene Hackman, Susan Sarandon, James Garner, Liev Schreiber, and Stockard Channing. This has been episode 395 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you check out this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.